It was the ultimate power move, but not the kind you see in a boardroom. It happened at 35,000 feet in the hushed, rarefied air of first class. The weapon wasn't a hostile takeover, but a quiet four-word sentence dripping with condescension. "This seat isn't for you." Those words were aimed at Dr. Evelyn Reed, a black woman who had earned her place in every room she'd ever entered. The flight crew of Global Atlantic Airways Flight 88 had no idea who they were talking to. They saw her skin before they saw her ticket. They saw a target for their prejudice, not the one woman who held the power to dismantle their careers and ground their airline, all without raising her voice. They were about to learn that karma isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet, meticulous audit that leaves you with nothing but the wreckage of your own choices. The hum of the Boeing 707's powerful GE90 engines was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Evelyn Reed. It was the sound of transition, of moving from one high-stakes environment to another. As a lead safety and compliance auditor for the International Aviation Safety Authority, IASA, the world's foremost regulatory body for air travel, her life was a curated sequence of flights, sterile hotel rooms, and tense, windowless boardrooms where airline executives either feared or revered her. Today, however, was different. This wasn't a work trip. After a grueling 3-month audit of a budget carrier in Eastern Europe, a project that had exposed so many near misses and falsified records that it sent shudders through the industry, Evelyn was taking a well-deserved 2-week vacation. No reports, no surprise inspections. Just London to her beloved New York. A chance to decompress, see her family, and simply be Evelyn, not Auditor Reed. She had treated herself cashing in a mountain of loyalty points for a seat that dreams were made of 1A, the coveted solo pod at the very front of the Global Atlantic Airways first-class cabin. It was her sanctuary for the next 7 hours, a promise of champagne, a lie, flat bed, and blissful anonymity. Evelyn, dressed in tailored, comfortable black trousers and a cashmere sweater, her hair styled in elegant locks, presented her boarding pass to the flight attendant at the door. The woman whose name tag read Barb offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a practiced plasticine expression that Evelyn had seen 1,000 times. "Welcome aboard," Barb said, her gaze flicking from the boarding pass to Evelyn's face and back again. There was a microsecond of a hesitation, a tightening at the corner of her mouth. Evelyn, whose job it was to notice details. Others missed a frayed wire, a nervous tick. A signature that didn't match, clocked it instantly but chose to ignore it. She was off the clock. "Thank you," Evelyn replied warmly, stepping into the cabin and turning left. She found 1A, a masterpiece of aviation luxury, and slid her carry-on into the personal overhead bin. As she settled into the plush leather seat, stretching her legs out into the impossibly large footwell, she felt the tension of the past 3 months begin to melt away. She pulled out a novel, a welcome departure from the dense technical manuals that usually occupied her time. A few moments later, Barb appeared at her side. "Ma'am?" The warmth from the initial greeting was gone, replaced by a tone of polite but firm authority. "Yes?" Evelyn looked up her finger, marking her page. "I believe you may be in the wrong seat," Barb said, her voice just loud enough for the passengers in 1C and 2A to hear. Evelyn held up her boarding pass. 1A. That's what it says here. Barb glanced at it again, this time, with an air of theatrical skepticism. Right. Sometimes there are last-minute changes that don't get reflected on the paper copy. This section is generally reserved. reserved for whom Evelyn thought the question hanging unspoken in the air. She knew exactly what was happening. It was a familiar, ugly dance. She decided to play her part, to give the system a chance to correct itself. "Could you check your manifest, then?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm and even. "I'm quite sure this is my assigned seat." Barb's smile became a thin, tight line. "Of course." She walked away, not towards the galley where the electronic manifest would be, but to her junior colleague, a young man named Leo, who was arranging magazines. They spoke in hushed tones, their heads close together. Barb gestured subtly back towards Evelyn. Leo glanced over his expression, a mixture of confusion and youthful deference to his senior. He approached Evelyn a minute later, a tablet in his hand. "Ma'am, my colleague Barbara mentioned there might be some confusion. Can I see your boarding pass again?" Evelyn obliged. Leo looked at the pass, then at his tablet. He scrolled, then scrolled again. Evelyn could see her name on the screen, from her angle. Read Evelyn. Status Platinum. Seat 1A. Leo's face flushed slightly. He knew she was in the right place. He looked back at Barb, who was now standing by the galley, arms crossed, watching them like a hawk. The silent pressure was immense. "There appears to be an issue with the system, ma'am," Leo stammered, avoiding eye contact. "It seems this seat is blocked for a different passenger, a premier client." Evelyn's entire career was built on calling out falsehoods. A blocked seat had a specific code. A premier client would have their name listed. He was lying, and he was a bad liar. "A premier client," Evelyn pressed gently. "What's their name? Perhaps they've already boarded and are in my seat by mistake." She knew the seat was empty when she arrived. I can't disclose that information," Leo said, flustered. It was at this point that Barb decided to re-engage, swooping in as if to rescue her floundering colleague. "As you can see, there's been a mistake," Barb said, her voice now carrying a note of finality. "Sir," she said, turning to Leo, "why don't you show the lady to her correct seat?" The deliberate pause, the use of lady instead of ma'am, was a calculated insult. It was meant to diminish, to put her in her place. "And where would my correct seat be?" Evelyn asked, her eyes locked on Barb's. "I'm sure we have a lovely seat for you in premium economy," Barb said, the plastic smile returning. "It's a very comfortable cabin." The suggestion was so audacious, so steeped in prejudice, that it was almost breathtaking. It was the assumption that she, a black woman, couldn't possibly belong here, that her presence must be an error, and that the correct place for her was several rungs down the ladder. The passengers in the nearby seats were now openly staring, some with discomfort, others with a sort of detached curiosity. Evelyn felt a familiar coldness settle over her. It was the feeling she got just before she uncovered a major safety violation, a dispassionate, analytical focus. The vacation was over. She was ordered to read again. "Let me be perfectly clear," Evelyn said, her voice dropping slightly but gaining a new hard edge of steel. "This is my seat. It is paid for. It is assigned to me. I have presented my boarding pass twice. Your colleague has seen my name on his manifest. There is no confusion. There is no mistake. I will not be moving to premium economy." Barb's face hardened. The pretense of customer service was gone. "Ma'am, if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to get the captain." "Please do," Evelyn said, and turned back to her novel, her hands perfectly steady. She wasn't reading, of course. She was documenting. Every word, Every action, the time, the names, the reactions of other passengers. It was second nature. Captain Richard Sterling was the kind of pilot who looked the part, tall, silver-haired, with an air of unflappable command. He came out of the cockpit, his brow furrowed with annoyance at being disturbed before takeoff. Barb spoke to him in a rapid, hushed voice, painting a picture of a difficult, uncooperative passenger who was refusing to acknowledge a seating error. She carefully omitted the part about premium economy. He approached Evelyn, his expression one of a weary parent dealing with a petulant child. "Ma'am, Captain Sterling, my crew tells me there's an issue with your seat." "There is no issue with my seat," Captain Evelyn said, looking up at him. "There is an issue with your crew's assumption that I don't belong in it." The captain sighed clearly, not interested in nuance. "Listen, we're on a tight schedule. My head flight attendant is the best in the fleet. If she says there's a discrepancy, there's a discrepancy. We need to get you to your proper seat so we can close the doors." He didn't ask to see her ticket. He didn't consult the manifest. He took his crew's word as gospel. It was a catastrophic failure of command, a complete breakdown of protocol. In Evelyn's world, this was known as a confirmation bias cascade, and it led to disasters. Captain Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Are you refusing to verify my ticket and the official passenger manifest?" He seemed taken aback by her formal tone. "I'm asking you to cooperate with my crew. We can sort out the paperwork and any compensation later." Suddenly, a man in seat 2C, a distinguished-looking white gentleman in his 60s, spoke up. "Excuse me, Captain. This is absurd." All eyes turned to him. "My name is Arthur Henderson. I'm in 2C. I couldn't help but overhear. The lady has been perfectly polite. Your crew has been badgering her since she sat down. If you need this specific seat for some reason, I'll happily switch with her. She can have my seat." Barb and Captain Sterling exchanged a look. Here was an easy way out. "That's a very kind offer," Sir Barb said immediately, a wave of relief washing over her face. She turned to Evelyn, her victory assured. "There. You can take seat 2C. Problem solved." But it wasn't solved. It was confirmed. The issue was never about seat 1A. It was about Evelyn being in seat 1A. By accepting the switch, they had demonstrated that the seat itself was not blocked, not reserved, not assigned to anyone else. They had simply wanted her, the black woman, out of it. It was the final damning piece of evidence. Evelyn slowly gathered her book and her small purse. She looked at Barb, at Leo, and finally at Captain Sterling. She gave them a small, enigmatic smile. It was a smile that held no warmth, only the promise of a reckoning they couldn't possibly comprehend. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she said to the man, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I appreciate your kindness." She moved to seat 2C, settled in, and fastened her seatbelt. The crew bustled about, their relief palpable. They thought they had won. They thought the problem was over. For Evelyn Reed, the work was just beginning. She pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from her purse. It was her personal log, separate from her official IASA equipment. On a fresh page, under the heading, Global Atlantic 88, LHR, JFK, she began to write. Incident, start 10:45. GMT, Flight Attendant Barbara Jensen, per visual on manifest, FA Leo Vance, Captain Richard Sterling. Initial contact. False claim of seat misassignment. Escalation. Attempted relocation to lower class of service. premium economy. Failure of command. Captain refused to verify passenger documentation. Discrimination confirmed by crew's acceptance of seat swap with passenger Arthur Henderson Holtor. 2C. She closed the notebook. The plane began its pushback from the gate. The flight attendants performed the safety demonstration, their movements crisp and rote. But Evelyn wasn't watching the demonstration. She was watching them, and all she could see were cracks in the foundation. If they could be this negligent, this unprofessional, this willing to disregard protocol over something as simple as a seat, what other, more critical duties were they failing at? She pulled out her phone and switched it to airplane mode. But first she composed a single encrypted email to her direct superior, Marcus Thorne, the head of the IASA's Atlantic Division. The subject line was just 2 words: unscheduled audit. She would hit send the moment they landed. The 7-hour flight across the Atlantic was on the surface perfectly pleasant for Evelyn in seat 2C. The champagne was crisp, the meal was exquisite, and the lie-flat bed was comfortable. Yet she didn't sleep. Her mind, now fully engaged in auditor mode, was a whirlwind of process and protocol. She was an anthropologist, observing a foreign tribe, noting every interaction, every shortcut. She watched as Barb held court in the galley, laughing with the other crew members, the incident seemingly forgotten. She saw Leo Vance purposefully avoid her aisle, his face a mask of shame and anxiety whenever their eyes threatened to meet. She observed Captain Sterling make his perfunctory walk-through of the cabin, exuding a confidence he had not earned. They were all living in a world that had ended the moment they challenged her. They just didn't know it yet. Upon landing at JFK, as the plane taxied to the gate, Evelyn watched the other passengers slowly gather their things. Mr. Henderson from 2C caught her eye and gave her a small, supportive nod. Evelyn smiled back, a genuine smile this time. She made a mental note to get his full contact information. A good witness is precise, credible, and willing to speak. A retired lawyer, as he later introduced himself, while they waited for the jet bridge, was the gold standard. What they did was disgraceful, Arthur Henderson said quietly, handing her his business card. If you choose to make a formal complaint, and I hope you do, please don't hesitate to call me. I will happily provide a statement. Thank you, Arthur. I may just do that, Evelyn said, tucking the card safely away. The moment she was in the terminal, she switched her phone off airplane mode. The email to Marcus Thorne was sent. Less than 2 minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. Evelyn, I got your email. Don't tell me they lost your luggage, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. Worse, Evelyn replied, finding a quiet corner near a departure gate. She quickly and dispassionately recounted the entire incident, from Barb's first approach to the captain's final dismissive judgment. She used the precise, emotionless language of a field report. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus, a man who had seen everything from counterfeit parts rings to pilots flying on fraudulent licenses, was audibly stunned. They tried to move you to premium economy. He finally said, a note of disbelief in his voice. On what grounds? The unstated grounds, Marcus, were that I was a black woman in a seat they felt I wasn't entitled to. The stated grounds were a fictitious system error and a blocked seat that magically unblocked when a white passenger offered to switch, and the captain backed his crew without verification. Without a moment's hesitation, Evelyn confirmed. It's a symptom of a dangerously complacent culture, Marcus. If this is their attitude toward passenger verification, a foundational FAA and IASA mandate, What does their compliance look like on safety-critical procedures, logbook accuracy crew, rest requirements, emergency equipment checks? This was how Evelyn's mind worked. The initial insult, while personally infuriating, was merely a data point. It was the implication of that data point that had her professional senses screaming. Discrimination was a serious offense, but it was often a canary in the coal mine for deeper, more systemic rot. An unscheduled audit is a big move, Evelyn Marcus said, though she could hear the gears turning in his head. Global Atlantic is a legacy carrier. They'll push back hard. Let them, Evelyn said. My vacation is officially cancelled. I want a team. I want to be at their JFK operations hub by 0800 tomorrow. I want access to everything HR records for the crew of Flight 88. Their training files, the full maintenance log for that specific 707, and the duty rosters for their entire JFK-based long-haul fleet for the past 6 months. You'll have it, Marcus said without hesitation. I'll assemble a team from the New York office. They'll meet you at the hotel. Get some rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow we go to war. Meanwhile, in the crew lounge at JFK, Barb Jensen was holding a debrief with her cabin team. She was triumphant. See, you just have to be firm, she announced, pouring herself a coffee. She was clearly trying it on, probably had a cheap ticket, and hoped no one would notice her sitting in 1A. When we called her on it, she backed down. Leo Vance looked down at his shoes. Barb, her boarding pass said 1A. I saw her name on the manifest. Barb waved a dismissive hand. Glitches happen all the time, Leo. You have to trust your gut, and my gut told me she didn't belong there. The captain backed me up completely. It's all about presenting a united front. Captain Sterling, who had just come in to sign off his flight report, overheard the conversation. What's this about the passenger in first? He asked. All sorted, Captain Barb said brightly. Just a minor seating issue. She was a bit difficult, but we handled it. This was a critical juncture. Captain Sterling could have asked for more details, could have questioned the narrative. Instead, he chose the path of least resistance. He wanted to get home. Good, he said, nodding. Now we need to log this. Officially. She was being disruptive and refused to follow crew instructions. We had to move her. It's important to have it on record in case she files some frivolous complaint looking for a payout. Barb's eyes lit up. This was perfect. It wasn't just about her being right anymore. It was about protecting themselves by creating an official alternate version of events. Absolutely, Captain, she said. Together they sat down at a terminal. Captain Sterling brought up the official post-flight report. Under the section for in-flight incidents, he began to type with Barb dictating the narrative. Passenger Dr. Evelyn Reed, seat 1A, became confrontational and verbally aggressive when informed of a necessary seat relocation due to a last-minute manifest update. Passenger initially refused to comply with multiple crew instructions, causing a delay in securing the cabin for departure. The situation was de-escalated when the passenger eventually agreed to move to an alternative seat in the same cabin. Her behavior was disruptive and inconsistent with cabin safety regulations. Every sentence was a calculated lie designed to paint Evelyn as the aggressor and them as the calm, professional crew managing a difficult situation. Leo watched them, a knot of acid forming in his stomach. Captain, he began, his voice barely a whisper. I don't think verbally aggressive is... She questioned my authority and the authority of my head attendant. Leo Captain Sterling cut him off, his tone sharp. That's aggression in my book. We stick together on this. It's our word against hers. Are we clear? Leo looked from the captain's stern face to Barb's smug one. He was 25 years old, thousands of dollars in debt from flight school, and terrified of losing his job. He gave a weak, miserable nod. "Crystal clear, Captain," he mumbled. Captain Sterling hit submit. The report was now part of the official record, a digital time bomb. They had no idea that the woman they had just slandered was at that very moment assembling the very team that would use that false report as a linchpin to tear their entire world apart. They thought they had written the final word on the matter. In reality, they had just signed their own confession. The Global Atlantic Airways North American Operations Center was a hive of controlled chaos, humming with the precise caffeinated energy that keeps thousands of tons of metal and hundreds of thousands of lives moving through the sky every day. In the main operations room, flight dispatchers monitored weather patterns over the Atlantic crew schedulers, juggled rosters like complex puzzles, and the air crackled with the jargon of the trade. It was a world that ran on confidence procedure and an ingrained sense of institutional pride. At 0759, it was business as usual. By 0801, that world had been invaded. The invasion force consisted of 4 people. They didn't storm the gates. They walked calmly through the automatic glass doors, their movements devoid of hurry, but filled with an unnerving purpose. At the lead was Dr. Evelyn Reed, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She was flanked by a compact, sharp-eyed man with a tablet clutched in his hand. Ben Carter, the IASA's top data forensics auditor, and a woman with streaks of grey in her dark hair and the calloused, capable hands of a lifelong mechanic, Maria Garcia, a legendary maintenance and airworthiness specialist. A 4th junior auditor brought up the rear, carrying their initial case files. They bypassed the gleaming model airplanes and self-congratulatory corporate slogans in the lobby and arrived at the main security desk. Evelyn presented her credentials. Dr. Evelyn Reed, IASA. She stated her voice calm, but carrying an authority that made the security guard straighten his spine. We are initiating an unscheduled Level 2 audit, effective immediately. Please inform your head of operations, Mr. David Chen, that we are here. The words unscheduled audit spread through the nearby cubicles like a virus. Phones were discreetly picked up. Messages were typed with frantic thumbs. 10 minutes later, David Chen hurried out to meet them, a harried artificial smile plastered on his face. He was a man accustomed to managing crises, but his eyes betrayed a deep-seated panic. Dr. Reed, a pleasure, he lied. Extending a hand, she politely but firmly ignored. There must be some mistake in the scheduling. We were prepared for your team next quarter. Perhaps I can show you our new crew facilities while my assistant clears this up. He was trying to contain them to steer them toward the sanitized, pre-approved parts of his operation. Evelyn saw the tactic for what it was. "There is no mistake, Mr. Chen," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And we will not be taking a tour. What we require immediately is a secure conference room with a dedicated, unrestricted network line. We also require the presence of your divisional heads of flight crew training maintenance and human resources in that room in 30 minutes. And finally, you will instruct your IT department to grant my colleague," she gestured to Ben, full administrative level access to your entire digital infrastructure. That includes crew rosters, training databases, maintenance logs, and all internal communications. Any delay or attempt to restrict this access will be noted as a direct obstruction of an IASA investigation. Chen's smile vanished. This wasn't a review. It was a vivisection. He had no choice but to comply. He led them to a large, sterile conference room on the executive floor, the kind used for celebrating successful quarters, not for dissecting corporate failures. For Evelyn and her team, it would become their war room. Within an hour, the room was transformed. Ben Carter had jacked his high-powered laptop into their network, his screen a cascade of code as he began pulling terabytes of data. Maria Garcia had demanded the complete unredacted physical and digital maintenance history for a specific Boeing 707 registration, NGA88, and was now poring over blueprints and parts manifests. The junior auditor was setting up a secure printer and organizing files. On the large whiteboard, Evelyn wrote a single heading: Global Atlantic Flight 88, 29th June. Her first order of business was to read the official incident report filed by Captain Sterling. She projected it onto the wall, the clinical corporate language a stark contrast to the ugliness it described. She read it once for content, then a second time for nuance, analyzing the word choices. Passenger became confrontational. Refused to comply. Verbally aggressive. It was the language of someone who never expected to be challenged, the arrogance of a man so secure in his position that he believed his version of reality was the only one that mattered. "Get me their jackets," she commanded the junior auditor. "Sterling, Jensen, and Vance. I want everything. Every performance review, every passenger letter, good and bad, every sick day, every training sign-off." As the files loaded on her screen, she began to build a psychological profile. Captain Sterling. A pilot whose technical skills were consistently rated high, but whose command reviews contained recurring keywords from subordinates, arrogant, dismissive, unapproachable. A picture emerged of a man who flew planes brilliantly, but managed people abysmally. Barbara Jensen's file was a mountain of contradictions. Years of glowing reviews for her efficiency were interspersed with a recurring pattern of passenger complaints. Evelyn read one from 2 years prior, an Asian businessman who claimed Miss Jensen had treated him with unwarranted suspicion and disdain when he'd asked for help with his luggage, quipping that the overhead bins are for people who can lift their own bags. The complaint had been resolved with a $100 voucher. Global Atlantic hadn't been solving a problem. They had been feeding it. While Evelyn dissected the human element, Ben Carter found the first digital thread. "Evelyn, you need to see this," he said quietly, his eyes glued to his screen. "I'm running a cross-reference algorithm on training certifications versus actual flight logs." Evelyn and Maria gathered behind him. On the screen were 2 windows. One showed the official training database. It listed Barbara Jensen and Richard Sterling as having completed their mandatory emergency water landing and evacuation drill on April 12th of that year in the simulation facility in Queens. The signature of the training supervisor was clearly visible. "Looks fine, right?" Ben said. Then he maximized the second window. It contained the flight and GPS data for Global Atlantic's fleet on that exact date. He typed in their employee numbers. On April the 12th, at the precise time they were supposedly in a simulator in New York, Captain Sterling and Attendant Jensen were crewing Flight 62 to Dubai. At the timestamp of their certification, their aircraft, according to its own satellite data, was at a cruising altitude of 37,000 feet over the coast of Newfoundland. The room went silent. It was irrefutable. The digital footprint of the airplane they were on was a perfect alibi, proving their training certification was a complete fabrication. "It's a ghost drill," Maria Garcia muttered, shaking her head in disgust. "I've seen this at budget carriers in the third world, not here. If they're faking this, what else are they faking?" As if on cue, Maria's own line of inquiry yielded fruit. Speaking of which, she said, tapping a long list of codes on her own screen. The maintenance logs for Flight 88's aircraft. In the last 90 days, 7 deferrals on critical path components. They're technically legal deferrals, but it's a pattern. They're kicking the can down the road. Look at this one. Intermittent fault on number 2 engine bleed air pressure sensor. That's a key component for cabin pressurization. Instead of replacing the sensor, they had engineers reseat the connection 3 times. It's a cheap fix, not a real one. They're gambling with passenger lives to save a few dollars on parts and labor. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. The discrimination Evelyn faced wasn't an isolated act of malice. It was a symptom of a deep, pervasive culture of dishonesty, where faking safety training and patching up critical equipment was standard operating procedure. Evelyn then directed the junior auditor to contact Arthur Henderson. The call was brief. Mr. Henderson, incandescent with a lawyer's righteous fury, was not only willing to provide a statement, but insisted on having it notarized and messengered over before the end of the day. He remembered every word, every sneer, every dismissive gesture. He was their perfect witness. Now they had all the pieces: the provably false report, the unimpeachable witness, the damning evidence of falsified safety training and negligent maintenance. But Evelyn needed one more thing. She needed to break the conspiracy of silence from the inside. She needed Leo Vance. He was pulled out of his pre-flight briefing for a flight to Zurich. The summons from an IASA auditor sent a wave of whispers through the crew lounge. As he was escorted down the long executive hallway, his face was pale with terror. He walked into the war room and saw the 4 auditors, the whiteboard covered in his flight number, the projected documents on the wall. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Evelyn dismissed the others, leaving just the 2 of them in the silent, imposing room. She didn't begin with an accusation. She gestured to a chair. "Leo." "Please sit down," she said, her voice gentle. He did so, perching on the edge of the seat, his hands clenched in his lap. She slid a bottle of water across the table. "I want you to understand something, Leo. The passenger from Flight 88 is not in this room. Today I am an auditor, and my only interest is the truth." She gestured to the whiteboard. "We have the flight data. We have the maintenance logs. We have the training records. We know for a fact that your captain and head attendant were not qualified for that flight, and that they subsequently lied on a federal document about the incident with me. We have a sworn affidavit from another passenger confirming it. This is no longer an internal matter. We have enough evidence to recommend a criminal investigation to the Department of Justice." She let the gravity of those words settle over him. "Right now, Leo, your name is on that false report as a concurring witness. That makes you part of a conspiracy. Your captain and head attendant tied their fate to a lie, and in your silence you tied yourself to them. I have your file. You have a clean record. You have commendations for your positive attitude. You have your whole career ahead of you. They are drowning. The only question for you right now is whether they are going to pull you down with them." Tears welled in Leo's eyes. He stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking. I didn't want to," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Barb, she had it out for you from the moment you boarded. She said you didn't look the part. I saw your name on the manifest. I knew you were in the right seat. But she's a senior, and I was scared." And the captain Evelyn pressed softly. He didn't even look at the paperwork, Leo confessed, now openly weeping with shame and fear. He just told Barb to handle it. Then in the lounge, he said we all needed to be on the same page. He typed the report. He asked if I agreed that you were aggressive. When I hesitated, he gave me this look. He said, "We protect our own Leo." I just nodded. I didn't know what else to do. He looked up at her, his face a mess of regret. What they did was wrong. I knew it then, and I know it now. I've barely slept. I'm so sorry. Evelyn listened, her expression unchanging, but her internal mission accomplished. She slid a new document across the table. It was the official IASA whistleblower protection form. "This is your chance to do the right thing." "Leo," she said, "tell us everything. Document it. Sign it. Separate yourself from their lies and anchor yourself to the truth. Help us fix the broken system that put you in that impossible position." Without a moment's hesitation, Leo took the pen and began to write his confession, pouring out onto the page. He signed his name at the bottom with a hand that was finally steady. After Leo had been quietly escorted out of the building, the team stood together in the war room. They had done it. In less than 12 hours, they had amassed an airtight, indefensible case of corruption, negligence, and criminal conspiracy. Evelyn Reed walked to the window, looking down at the JFK tarmac, where a Global Atlantic 707 was being prepared for its evening departure. Then she turned back to her team, a cold, determined light in her eyes. She picked up her phone and dialed the main switchboard for Global Atlantic's corporate headquarters. "Yes," she said to the operator. "I need the office of your Chief Executive Officer, Julian Croft." There was a pause, and then a polished professional secretary's voice came on the line. "Mr. Croft's office, how may I direct your call?" "This is Dr. Evelyn Reed from the International Aviation Safety Authority." Evelyn stated each word delivered with the weight of the evidence behind her. "Please inform Mr. Croft that I will be in his main boardroom tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to present my team's findings. And please add—" She paused, delivering the final devastating sentence, that he should be prepared to discuss the immediate and indefinite suspension of Global Atlantic's North Atlantic route certificate. The 50th floor boardroom at Global Atlantic's corporate headquarters was designed to intimidate. A colossal slab of polished mahogany, so vast it seemed to bend the light around. It served as the central table. The chairs were monuments of black leather and chrome, and the wall of glass behind the CEO's seat presented the New York skyline not as a view, but as a conquest. It was a room built for kings, not for accountants or regulators. At the head of this imposing table sat Julian Croft. He exuded an aura of bored leonine power, flanked by his chief legal counsel, Maria Flores, and a pale, sweating David Chen. Croft wasn't just a CEO. He was an emperor in a bespoke suit, and this meeting was a bothersome gnat buzzing around his throne. At precisely 9 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. Dr. Evelyn Reed entered her presence, a study in controlled force. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the opulent room. Following a step behind her was Marcus Thorne, the head of the IASA's Atlantic Division. His face was a grim, unreadable mask, but his presence alone signaled that this was no routine inquiry. They took their seats opposite Croft, placing two slim briefcases on the gleaming table. They were outnumbered, but the balance of power in the room had already shifted decisively. Croft let the silence hang for a moment, a petty power play. He steepled his fingers, looking down his nose at Evelyn. "Dr. Reed." He began, his voice smooth and condescending. "I trust we can dispense with this quickly, My schedule is rather unforgiving. David tells me you've been running his people ragged over a customer service issue. Let's hear it, and then I'll have my team cut you a check for whatever inconvenience this passenger suffered, and we can all get back to our real jobs." Maria Flores, the lawyer, shifted uneasily. She had advised against such a dismissive opening, but Croft was not a man who took advice well. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were like camera lenses, cold and analytical. "There will be no check, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through his manufactured authority. "Because this is not a customer service issue. This is a catastrophic failure of safety culture, professional integrity, and corporate oversight. And your real job, as you put it, is about to become managing the fallout from that failure." She opened her briefcase and placed a single file on the table. "2 days ago, I initiated an unscheduled audit of your airline. The trigger was a specific incident, but what we have uncovered points to a deep-seated systemic and dangerous cultural rot within Global Atlantic. A rot that I've concluded emanates from the top." "A bold accusation," Croft scoffed, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Let's see the evidence for this so-called rot." "Gladly," Evelyn said. "We can call this Exhibit A, the incident." She didn't raise her voice, but her articulation was so precise that every word was a hammer blow. "On flight GAA-8 from London, a paying first-class passenger in seat 1A, a black woman, was targeted by head flight attendant Barbara Jensen. She was told, and I quote, 'This seat isn't for you.' She was lied to about a system error. She was then demeaned with an offer to be moved to a lovely seat in premium economy. When she calmly stood her ground, your Captain Richard Sterling was summoned. He failed to perform the most basic due diligence, verifying her ticket against the manifest, and instead chose to back his crew's prejudiced assumptions, threatening to delay the flight. She paused, letting the silence accuse them. The entire sordid affair was only resolved when another passenger, a white man, offered to switch seats, an offer your crew accepted immediately, proving that the issue was never the seat, but the skin color of the person sitting in it. Croft waved a dismissive hand. "An unfortunate, isolated incident involving an overzealous employee. It will be handled." "It's already been handled," Evelyn countered, sliding a second document across the table. A projector on the ceiling hummed to life, displaying the document on a large screen behind her. "Exhibit B, the false report. Your overzealous employee, in conjunction with your captain in command, filed an official incident report. In it, they described the passenger, the victim, as verbally aggressive and disruptive. They fabricated a narrative to protect themselves. Filing a false report with a federal regulatory body is not an incident, Mr. Croft. It is a crime." The screen split. On the right appeared a scanned copy of Arthur Henderson's notarized affidavit. Evelyn used a laser pointer to highlight the stark contradictions. "Here is the sworn testimony of Mr. Henderson, a respected attorney. He describes your crew's behavior as badgering and disgraceful, and the passenger's conduct as perfectly polite and calm. One of these is a self-serving lie. The other is a verifiable, independent account of the truth." Croft's jaw tightened. He shot a venomous glare at David Chen, whose face was now the color of old parchment. This was spiraling beyond a simple write-down. "It gets worse," Evelyn said, her voice relentless. "Because your crew didn't just lie to us. They lied to each other. We took the liberty of interviewing the third crew member, flight attendant Leo Vance. This is Exhibit C, the confession." The legal team audibly gasped. "Mr. Vance, under the protection of the ISA Whistleblower Act, has given us a full, detailed statement. He has confirmed that Ms. Jensen deliberately targeted the passenger. He has confirmed that Captain Sterling applied pressure on him to concur with the demonstrably false report. Your chain of command is not just broken, Mr. Croft, it's actively criminal. Croft was about to speak to bluster to object, but Evelyn gave him no opening. She moved on her pace, accelerating. But as I said, this was merely the symptom. The disease is the culture of complacency that you as CEO have fostered. A culture that prioritizes on-time departures over actual safety. Exhibit defalsified training records. A new slide appeared showing rows of dates and signatures. Your Captain Richard Sterling and Head Attendant Barbara Jensen have not been certified in mandatory emergency procedures for over 26 months. Specifically, they cannot demonstrate proficiency in a controlled cabin decompression or a water landing evacuation. Their training logs contain forged signatures signed off by a supervisor who admitted to pencil whipping the records for trusted senior crew. The very people you put in charge of 300 souls over the Atlantic Ocean were not qualified to handle the worst-case scenarios, and your system was either too inept to notice or too negligent to care. She let that sink in before delivering the final blow. And finally, Exhibit E, gross maintenance negligence. An audit of the specific aircraft, NGA-88, revealed a pattern of deferred maintenance. A faulty sensor on the number 2 engine's bleed air valve, which could lead to pressurization issues. A known slow leak in the aft galley's hydraulic accumulator, ignored for 3 weeks. 12 seats with inoperative oxygen masks, simply placarded inoperative instead of being replaced. These are not minor details. They are accidents waiting to happen. They are the direct result of a management culture that squeezes maintenance budgets and overworks ground crews to the breaking point. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Croft's. For the first time, she allowed a trace of emotion, a cold, righteous anger to enter her voice. This culture of getting away with it starts at the top, Mr. Croft. It's in your quarterly reports that praise impossible efficiency metrics. It's in the pressure you place on your managers, which they then place on their crews. Your employees felt emboldened to discriminate against a passenger because they knew the system. You created a system that ignores complaints, rewards, shortcuts, and punishes integrity would protect them. They were wrong. Julian Croft, for the first time in a decade, was utterly defeated. The bluster, the arrogance, it all drained away, leaving a hollowed-out man facing the ruin of his own making. Marcus Thorne, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, now spoke. His baritone voice filled the room with the finality of a judge's gavel. Mr. Croft, Ms. Flores, pursuant to the authority vested in the International Aviation Safety Authority, by international treaty and federal law, and in light of the findings presented today, findings which include systemic safety violations, falsification of official records, criminal conspiracy to mislead regulators, and a demonstrated failure of corporate oversight. I am issuing the following directive. He opened his own briefcase and produced a document with a heavy red seal. Effective immediately, the IASA is issuing an emergency suspension of Global Atlantic Airways operating certificate for the entire North Atlantic corridor. All flights between North America and Europe are grounded. This suspension will remain in effect pending a full top-to-bottom Level 1 audit of your entire operation and the implementation of a root and branch reform of your training, maintenance, and crew management divisions to be overseen and approved by this agency. You will not fly these routes again until we are satisfied you are safe. A copy of this directive and our preliminary findings will be forwarded to the FAA, the EASA, and the Department of Justice within the hour. The silence that followed was the sound of an empire collapsing. The fallout was a media firestorm. Global Atlantic's stock lost half its value before the Nasdaq halted trading. Financial news channels ran chyons screaming, "Regulators ground Atlantic giant," and "Safety scandal rocks airline." Barbara Jensen was summoned to the operations center that afternoon. She walked in with a defiant stride, expecting to be asked for her version of events. Instead, she was met by Maria Flores and the head of HR. They slid a copy of Leo's affidavit across the table. As she read his words, the color drained from her face. Her defiance crumbled into disbelief, then terror. Her termination was effective immediately for gross misconduct and endangering passengers. When she was escorted from the building, her ID badge deactivated, she was just a middle-aged woman, stripped of the only identity she had ever valued. Captain Sterling landed his flight from Rome that evening. As he walked down the jet bridge, he was met not by the ground crew, but by Global Atlantic's chief pilot. There were no pleasantries. "Richard, I need your wings and your credentials. Now!" The public humiliation in front of his crew and disembarking passengers was absolute. His career as a captain was over. For Julian Croft, the end came swiftly. An emergency board meeting was convened. Faced with shareholder lawsuits that would run into the billions and a brand now synonymous with prejudice and danger, they gave him a simple choice: resign or be fired with cause. His multi-million-dollar severance package was vaporized. The emperor was dethroned, his reign ending in disgrace. Leo Vance attended his first ethics and leadership seminar the following week. He was quiet, humbled, but an active participant. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that true integrity isn't about loyalty to your boss, but to the truth. 2 weeks later, Evelyn Reed sat in the first-class lounge of a rival airline at JFK, finally starting her vacation. She watched a news report detailing the ongoing chaos at Global Atlantic. She felt no joy, no triumphant sense of revenge. She felt the quiet satisfaction of a complex system righted of a dangerous flaw corrected. She hadn't sought to ruin lives, she had sought to uphold a principle. The principle that safety, professionalism, and human dignity are not optional extras, they are the minimum standard. Her power had not been in her anger, but in her unshakable commitment to that standard. The karma that followed was simply gravity taking its inevitable course. That right there is the difference between revenge and a reckoning. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't need to shout or cause a scene. Her power wasn't in her anger, it was in her competence. She was the one person on that plane who knew the rulebook better than the people flying it, and when they broke the most basic rules of human decency, she simply enforced the ones they broke for safety and integrity. The karma that hit the flight crew and the executives of Global Atlantic wasn't mystical. It was procedural. It was the hard, cold consequence of their own actions being brought into the light by someone they fatally underestimated. Their prejudice was just the loose thread she pulled, and in doing so unraveled an entire tapestry of corruption. If this story of quiet strength and absolute accountability resonated with you, show some love and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the most powerful people are often the ones who don't need to advertise it. And of course, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. In the comments below, tell us about a time you saw karma deliver a receipt in the most unexpected way. We'd love to hear it.